There was a man named Rick, 52 years old, who worked as a senior accountant in downtown Boston, a man whose life appeared steady and uneventful on the surface, yet was quietly shaped by a deep undercurrent of reflection and subtle dissatisfaction. Every morning, Rick followed the same routine. He woke up at precisely 6:15 a.m., prepared a cup of black coffee without sugar, and sat in silence by his small kitchen window, watching the world begin its hurried dance. He lived alone in a modest apartment on the third floor of an aging brick building, where the walls were slightly faded and the wooden floors creaked with every careful step. A space that held memories but echoed loneliness. Rick had dedicated nearly 3 decades of his life to numbers, spreadsheets, and quarterly reports. Over the years, he had gained a reputation in the firm for being reliable. Not flashy, not ambitious in the loud sense, but someone who delivered quietly and consistently. He never vied for attention, never made bold declarations, and never talked much about his personal dreams. He was the type of man who stayed late at work to correct others' errors without ever seeking credit. The one who noticed when others succeeded but rarely acknowledged his own efforts. But beneath that calm exterior was a man constantly comparing, not with jealousy, not with bitterness, but with an ache that whispered, "What about me?" Every promotion someone else received, every newer car in the company parking lot, every younger colleague flashing a new watch or sharing vacation photos from Italy or Greece. Rick would notice. He wouldn't say a word. His expression wouldn't change, but inside, something would tighten. A quiet coil of reflection that made him wonder if he had missed something in life, if he had played too safe, too quiet. Rick never openly complained. It wasn't in his nature, but his heart kept a quiet ledger, much like the spreadsheets he worked on. A column for things he wanted but never asked for. Rows filled with unspoken dreams, forgotten passions, and a total at the bottom that always read, pending. Rick had what many would describe as a secure and grounded existence. He held a stable job, a senior accounting position at a well-established Boston firm that had weathered recessions and leadership changes, and where his role had remained consistent, if not exciting. His office was a glass-cornered cubicle tucked along the side of the 14th floor, with just enough view of the city skyline to remind him of what he didn't quite reach. There was no uncertainty in his career, no threats of layoffs or instability. He had health benefits, a retirement plan, and the respect of his co-workers. On paper, his life was steady. He lived in a small condo on the outskirts of town, a 1-bedroom unit with beige walls and dated carpeting that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. It was quiet, functional, and just spacious enough for one person and his loyal companion, a black Labrador named Duke. Duke was 12 now, his fur beginning to gray around the muzzle, his movements slower but still full of warmth. The condo was filled with little routines and comforting silences, but also an air of static repetition, as if time moved in circles rather than forward. Outside in the reserved parking lot sat Rick's aging sedan, a 2008 model with peeling paint along the roof and a faint rattle when it idled at red lights. It wasn't stylish, and it had long outlived its original shine, but it still got him where he needed to go. He never thought much about upgrading. Rick wasn't someone who indulged in wants. He stuck to needs. His fridge usually held the same few items: eggs, leftover pasta, a couple of beer cans, and half a rotisserie chicken he'd stretch across 3 or 4 meals. To most outsiders, Rick's life might appear decent: stable job, roof over his head, a companion in Duke, and no debts chasing him. But from Rick's eyes, it all felt painfully average. There was no color in his days, no edge of adventure or sharp moments of pride. It was as if he were living a muted version of the life he once envisioned. Every day he observed the world moving faster around him. People he once mentored were now in higher positions. Colleagues a decade younger drove sleek, new SUVs that gleamed under the office lights while his car sat like a worn relic. Friends from college shared social media updates from Tuscany, Santorini, or the French Riviera. sipping wine under sunsets or smiling in cobblestone alleys. Meanwhile, Rick found himself staring at a plate of microwave reheated leftovers for the third night in a row. Duke's eyes watching him from the floor, the TV humming low in the background. He didn't complain. That wasn't Rick's style. But the feeling was there, a quiet gnawing inside him, reminding him of the distance between the life he had and the one he once hoped for. He never said it aloud, but deep down, he believed he was losing the race, and that feeling followed him everywhere. Every morning, Rick rode the same commuter train to work. Same platform, same time, same seat, always by the aisle. He liked that spot because it gave him room to stretch his legs and avoid small talk. But every morning, he'd glance out the window across the row and think to himself, "That's the view I should be getting. Why do I always settle for the aisle?" He thought about switching seats, but they were usually taken by the time he got on. One day, running a bit early, Rick managed to grab a window seat for the first time in months. He settled in, smiled slightly, and waited. A minute later, a teenager sat beside him, probably 17, hoodie up, earbuds in, quiet. The train rolled out. Rick turned his head and finally had the full view. Riverside trails, trees swaying, morning light dripping through the glass. He sipped his coffee and smiled. But then he noticed something. The teenager next to him kept adjusting, fidgeting, leaning toward the window awkwardly. At one point, he placed his fingers gently on the edge of the glass and closed his eyes, as if trying to feel something through it. Rick glanced down and noticed a folded cane beneath the kid's backpack. The boy was blind. He wasn't looking out the window. He was listening, feeling, imagining. Rick froze. He suddenly felt embarrassed for all those mornings he thought the window seat was the better view, because now he realized this kid would give anything just to see what Rick took for granted every day. For the rest of the ride, Rick didn't sip his coffee. He didn't scroll his phone. He just sat there, quietly, gratefully, taking in the view. Not because it was new, but because now he finally saw it. When the train reached the city, Rick stood up, gave the boy a small nod, and stepped off. And something in him felt lighter. He didn't care about the guy in the Porsche at the red light. Didn't care about the skyscrapers or the watch someone else was wearing. Because that morning, for the first time in years, Rick felt full, not from what he owned, but from what he noticed. So friends, happiness doesn't come from having more. It comes from realizing how much you already have. The view you're ignoring might be someone else's dream. If you like this video, do not forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.